Hello, everybody. Welcome to Move Better, Feel Better, the Feldenkrais Awareness Summit. I'm Cynthia Allen and glad to be back with you again in this theme, which is healing trauma. And we're going to be exploring healing trauma from fragmentation to embodiment today with Dr. Albert Wong. He is a licensed psychologist and somatics educator with long-standing interest in the intersection of embodiment, trauma, and scalable technology. That's very interesting. I want to know about that. He served as residential staff at the Esalen Institute for 5 years and was educated at Princeton, Oxford, and the University of Tennessee. He maintains a private practice around somatic psychotherapy in San Rafael, California. He is the former director of the somatic psychology program at JFK and is the founder of the online platform Somatopia, where he features online trainings in the areas of embodiment, trauma healing, and somatic psychology. Welcome, Albert. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Cynthia. I think it's just such an honor to be here as part of the summit, as part of, all with you and your crew, and just with all the people who are out there watching. When I think about scalable technologies, this is it, right? This is part of what we are doing, I think, collectively as a society that is enabled by kind of the technology of the internet. So I think in the old days, we couldn't reach as many people. And so you're really doing something special here. So
it is true, isn't it? We couldn't reach as many people. And also, I think, I don't know for you, but for me, I'm really getting challenged around the ideas that one-to-one, person-to-person is always best. I mean, I think there's actually been studies, right, for veterans that show they do really well with artificial intelligence as therapists, which just shocks me.
Yeah, totally. I think there's multiple aspects, right? Kind of with the kind of exposure and capacity to create certain kinds of environments in a safe way that are evocative, but also safe for veterans. That's one aspect with technology and artificial intelligence and virtual reality and all that kind of stuff. And then there's the whole notion of the group, like the group field, right? What does it mean to do work together in a group versus just solitary, right? And so even though maybe sometimes like on the internet, there's a sense of us in isolation, sometimes there's also like the feeling of, oh, we're actually part of a movement, we're part of a togetherness. One of my teachers, and it's interesting, Harriet Goslins, who is a Feldenkrais, she studied with Moshe Feldenkrais, and she always said that when she did groups at Esalen, groups of Feldenkrais at Esalen, that people's depth of work was always more profound. And there's something about, I think, the collectivity of the group and the sensing of the consciousness. Even though we might be individuals, like there's something that carries us when we connect with the group that holds us in a way that is more than we alone can be held, right?
I really think that's true. It's a kind of container. I mean, of course, the container can be all kinds of different types, but if people are really there to grow and to deepen, there's a kind of heldness, as you say, that provides not only a safety, but also it's like when as somebody else deepens, it deepens me, and then it helps the next person deepen. And there's like this, it's almost like you end up on a train ride together in a way.
That's a beautiful image, like a train ride together. And it's just like, yeah, I mean, and you see it because I'm primarily a psychotherapist, but you see like if when one person risks, right, or is able to experience a moment where something that was stuck releases, almost the whole group takes a breath out, right? There's a way in which that whole train ride kind of gains momentum and keeps going. So, yeah.
Well, what got you interested in somatics, and what do you mean by being, in addition to being a licensed psychologist, being a somatics educator?
Yeah. So what got me into somatics? Well, I really wasn't so much in a somatics person growing up. I mean, I played sports and all those things, but I didn't really have a lot of like contact with the emotional life of the body, right? That I was very academically well suited to thinking and studying and cogitating and all that stuff, but I didn't really have a sense of me, a sense of who I was or what I wanted or needed, a sense of an authentic connection with self. And I think what got me into it was a little bit of hope and desperation. There was, I was quite successful academically. I went to college and studied physics, like my father, and went where he studied physics, and and I was kind of on an escalator ride to becoming a fine young physicist, almost in my father's mold. But there was something about that and I couldn't figure out why, it just didn't seem right. It didn't feel like the right kind of piece of clothing, like it didn't fit. I kept trying to make it fit and it didn't really seem right. And I couldn't figure out what it was that I wanted and what was right or what was wrong. I made lists of pros and cons and would just spin round and round and round. And it was exhausting. And I think what I was missing was a capacity to listen to my body, my sense of who I was, and my sense of what actually authentically sprung forth when I became quiet and listened inside. You know, I didn't have that sense. So I just was wandering about for a while, trying to sort out my life. I was hanging out in like graduate institutions, but you know, you could only figure out life so much from reading books. And eventually I ended up buying a one-way ticket to a place called the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's one of these granddaddy of them all human potential movement centers, kind of a birthplace of like this confluence of East and West and somatics and yoga and mindfulness and kind of cultural revolution. I mean, just in terms of the '60s movement in the U.S. And so I landed there and ended up starting to try and listen to myself and who I was and my body. And that was a new thing. It wasn't something that I was used to doing, but it was something that I felt was incredibly important and powerful. And it gave me my sense of who I was again. Like I could figure out, oh, I have no idea how to make decisions, but if I listen to my body, there's something my body knows. And there's some wisdom there that I need to listen to. And so that's how I got into somatics. That's where that came from.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I think it really leads us right into this topic because uh, maybe you can help get us started here in a second with defining what is trauma, but I'm also thinking that then we can go into like what happens in trauma that makes it so hard for people to listen to themselves, to find themselves in that quiet space within.
Absolutely. Excellent question. Yeah. So maybe this is a good point just to kind of, I have a few slides maybe I could share just because like defining trauma is so valuable and important, and just starting to think about how it connects up with movement and how to move better and feel better, right? So the talk that I kind of prepared, and thanks for being a warm lead into this, was just about healing trauma from fragmentation to embodiment, right? And the trauma happens. I mean, trauma is part of the world nowadays, maybe more than we wish it were, right? And and how do we heal from it? How do we make it through in the aftermath of trauma, right? How does trauma happen and how can I heal in the aftermath of it? I think that Feldenkrais has so much to say about this, and the trauma literature has a lot to say about this. And I think there's maybe some ways in which these are really interlinked, right? I think this question of how does trauma happen and how can I heal in the aftermath of it is very closely linked to this question, right? How does chronic pain happen and how can I overcome it? Sometimes there's a lot of correlation between people who suffer from chronic pain and people who've experienced trauma, right? There's something about the experience of events that are traumatic that overwhelms the nervous system. And sometimes chronic pain seems to kind of manifest sometimes, okay? Linked also is this question: how does muscular restriction happen, perhaps? How, at least in some instances, how does it start? And how can I learn to move better and feel better, right? So, and you know, maybe some of the first things just to think about with respect to this is that the body does not exist separate from and independent from the mind, the psyche, and emotions, right? That the body and the mind are actually deeply linked, right? That how I feel on the inside in terms of my body can be very linked to how I feel, what I'm thinking and how I'm emotionally feeling, right? My psyche and emotions are part of a whole body-mind process, right? And you can even look at the word motion and emotion, right? Motion does not happen separate from emotion, right? If I'm moving in a particular way, like in a hurry, there's a certain emotional state that can come with that, right? Or if I'm moving in a way that's flowy, there's an emotional state that comes with that, okay? So how do things get stuck, right? How do things get stuck? And this comes back to your question, Cynthia, which was an excellent one. You know, how do you define trauma, right? What is trauma? And there's many ways to define it, but one of the most common is just this notion of too much, too fast, too soon, right? This notion of trauma overwhelming the nervous system by something happening, an event happening that was too much for it. It happened too fast, or it happened before the nervous system was ready to receive it, right? And so I think Moshe Feldenkrais encouraged folks to do things in a way that was easily, simply, comfortably, right? Almost as an antidote to sometimes Western society, kind of capitalism, materialism, television, etc. And that's a really good antidote also for the too much, too fast, too soon that happens in trauma, right? So, so one way of conceptualizing all this too much, too fast, too soon, what it does to the nervous system, and there's a trauma framework that I am borrowing from one of my teachers, Christine Stewart Price. She was a teacher of mine at the Esalen Institute, and it's the 3 boards model. Okay? So there's basically the surfboard, the keyboard, and the boardroom, and each of these have some wisdom about how trauma happens, how stuckness happens, how we stop moving, how we stop feeling sometimes, how we get stuck, and maybe how we can come back again. So yeah, let me just pause a little bit and just make sure, how is this landing? Does this make sense, Cynthia? Does it feel, yeah.
It does, and I feel like feel like the definition of trauma that you've chosen is a really good one, because I think when we look at it that way, it takes I think some of the stigma away, frankly.
Yeah.
That when people think about trauma, oftentimes we only think about trauma in a very narrow window, actually, in our
Yeah.
culture. And then people wonder, what's wrong with me? Why am I not getting better? Why am I so easily, people wouldn't use this word until they've been in therapy for a long time. Why am I so triggered by,
Mhm.
being around certain kinds of sounds or smells or whatever?
Right.
And I feel like this just, for me anyway, it takes away some of the stigma, which is just at any point in life, any of
Yeah.
us could have something that comes too fast, too much. And I know you had 3 words there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You got it. Absolutely. I think that is one of the great benefits of kind of framing trauma this way. And what an important shift, right? From the notion of asking the question, what's wrong with me, to the question of what happened to me. We can look at kids who are misbehaving or quote unquote misbehaving, right? And think that they're the problem child, but what's wrong with them? But I think maybe, just like you said, like we could start asking a different question, like what's happening in their lives, what happened to them, what was too much, too fast, too soon for them, right? So
Yes, and then it ends up being that, on a particular, depending on the situation, of course, but on a particular day, it could be that something becomes very traumatic because of the confluence of events. It may not have
exactly.
been really that it was even one thing. Uh,
Yeah.
and and that same one thing could have happened the day before and never bothered you, wouldn't bother you at all. So there's just such a wide range of what can happen for all of this. And I think it does take a lot of the mm, element of weakness, or the element of being maybe even an element of victimness. It maybe softens that a little bit, makes it a little less um,
Yeah,
difficult. So I like it.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thanks.
And I
Yeah,
like
yeah.
your chalk drawings. I feel like I'm back in Bible school. In Bible
Yeah.
school, we had these people who do these object lessons with chalk drawings to a
Oh,
song, and slowly it would all come out and
you know,
emerge.
it's my magic pen. I like it too. It helps. There's something, at least when I've seen folks use like PowerPoints, there's something like, oh, I don't know if there. I think when I was a kid, there was this children's story called, I forget who it was, and his purple crayon, and he could draw
Harold.
anything.
It was
Harold.
Harold.
Harold
I
and his
use
perfect.
Harold in the purple crayon as
Oh,
a
there you
book
go.
for clients and myself. I
Oh,
love
how
Harold.
wonderful. Isn't it? Yeah. And I feel like I'm Harold with his magic crayon, and he
That's
gets to
right.
create things that come to life. And, it turns what can be, a little bit of a staid, PowerPoint-ish, I don't know, like, there's even a somatic feeling to it, like a
That's right. It puts
PowerPoint.
movement into it. It puts movement
Yeah.
into it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe that's the theme. It's creating a living, breathing, dynamic something where it could otherwise be frozen, right? Which is
Yeah, which is very much what we're talking about, is because you talk about the stuckness, right? So the
right.
stuckness. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, yeah. So thanks for the the feedback. Well, so I think maybe that's a good segue to explore kind of the pen a little bit more,
Yeah.
and feel free to chime in as we go along. But I'll go ahead and take advantage of the pen and just start to talk a little bit about these 3 boards, if that's okay. So the surfboard, um, the keyboard, uh, and the boardroom. Uh, and that these 3 boards are, I think, a helpful way about thinking about trauma and what sometimes happens in our nervous systems and our muscular systems when we experience that too much, too fast, too soon, right? So if you think of and this is my physics background coming in, although these diagrams are not original to me. I think this conceptualization first came from Dan Siegel, the interpersonal neurobiology guy. You've actually had him, I think, on one of these summits before. Yeah. So you're well familiar with it. So hopefully this isn't too repetitive for your audience.
Okay. He talked a little bit about trauma in our summit for children with special need or disability, but that hasn't been his primary topic for us.
Okay, great. Well, then this is great. Okay, so this is a level of, you can call this nervous system activation, right? Oopsie, system activation. Or more commonly known as stress. Okay, right. We sometimes us psychologists have, like, I don't know, physiology or physics envy, and we try to kind of dress things up. But basically, this is your level of stress. Okay, and then you can imagine getting more stressed as you have a challenge to undertake, and then meeting the challenge and then becoming less stressed. And that's just a normal stress response. You have, like, you're sitting at rest, you're chilling out, you're maybe having margaritas at the beach, and then maybe there's something a little stressful that happens. You have to handle a situation. Okay, you rise to the challenge. Maybe there's a volleyball game on the beach, who knows, right? Okay, so that's a little stressful, but maybe enjoyable. You get to go, work out. It's a little stressed, and then afterwards you calm back down. Okay, and that was something that was that's within what we call the window of tolerance. Okay, that's your window of tolerance. It's easy enough to do. You can really. It's easy to cope with doing it, and you move through your. It wasn't too much, too fast, too soon. It was within a certain range of activation that was tolerable for you. Okay,
this is a fairly healthy cycle for us to go through on a fairly regular basis. Is that correct?
Absolutely. This is a totally normal, healthy. It's why we like roller coaster rides. It's why we like kind of challenges. It's why we, like a little bit of, sometimes they call it eustress, right? Like stress that's actually enjoyable, right? So absolutely. And it's a normal cycle that we go through. One name for it, there's so many names for this, but one name is called the arousal cycle. Arousal cycle, right? We're rest, then we become nervous system activated, aroused, and then we meet the challenge and then calm back down. And that's a normal, healthy cycle. Absolutely. Thanks, Cynthia. Okay. And then, but in trauma, something else happens, right? So in trauma, we might experience a challenge, and it might get a little more stressful, a little bit more stressful, a little bit more stressful, a little bit more stressful. And it might actually take us past our, what you might call a tipping point, right? Tipping point, right? Outside our window of tolerance, right? Okay. At which point it's almost too much for us to bear. So it could be, I use the example of a beach and then a volleyball game, but it might be, you're at the beach and you see somebody out there and they're drowning, and you're trying to go, it's actually, it feels really stressful. You're trying to go help them and save them. And you go out there and you're doing the best you can, but it's too much, too fast, too soon. Maybe you didn't have the capacity to manage the situation. Maybe it came at you too quickly. Maybe you weren't prepared, right? But maybe it was just too much for you yourself to hold. Okay. And when you're past your tipping point, this is the domain of trauma, right? This is where trauma lives. Okay. And something important happens there. Okay. Your body goes into a different mode. Sometimes it goes into fight or flight mode, where you're just trying to survive, right? Just make it through. If you're here too much, it goes. Some people go into freeze, right? So there's a counter wave that sometimes happens where people just faint, freeze, um, almost their body gets too overwhelmed. Okay, so but those are both trauma responses. Now, the reason why I call this the surfboard is because when you're down here uh, uh, in your experience, you're in your experience and you're able to ride the wave of your experience. You're able to see the beach. You're able to feel the sand. You're able to hear other people's voices. Everything is you're able to be present with your experience. You're able to ride the wave of your experience in a certain sense. Every time you, even when it's like exciting and more high arousal, you're still able to be connected with yourself and your body and your emotions. However, in the domain of trauma, you actually get thrown off your surfboard, right? Your experience is so intense that, in a sense, you get thrown off your experience, and it might look like, well, instead of being able to feel your body and notice where you are and see everything, right? Maybe you stop feeling in your body, right? Maybe your body goes numb. Maybe you fixate on certain images, or maybe you can't see certain images, right?
It
That there's a
sounds
certain
kind of get dull for me. Sounds will get dull, like I'm not really hearing things as clearly. Or
exactly
my vision will start to get a little dark, like I'm not really able to stay present.
totally exactly. And thanks, Cynthia. And so that's just a signifier that you're thrown off your surfboard, right? You're not able to be with what is. It's too much. It's too fast. It's too soon. Part of you starts to get thrown. Okay, so that happens. Now, when so that happens, and then and sometimes we get stuck up here, right? We get thrown off our surfboard, and then we get stuck off our surfboard when, everybody, after the day passes and everybody says, "Are you okay?" You say, "I think so," but maybe you still have that dull feeling inside. There's certain numbness, right? And so that's where the notion of the keyboard comes in, right? That the surfboard, actually, you can think of it as being constructed of, and this also is not my acronym, this is from the good work of Peter Levine. And in his conceptualization, the constituents of experience, the things that in my language make up the surfboard, there's 5 constituents: sensation, images, behavior, affect, and meaning. Right? And and just to use our example, right? When you get thrown off your surf, when you're alive and doing well in the world, and surfing the wave of your experience, you feel all of these things. You're able to feel your sensations. You're able to see the images around you. You're able to do what you're doing. You're able to engage with your actions. You're able to have your emotions, your affect, and you're able to make sense of what's going on. You know where you are. You know what's happening. You can say, "Oh yeah, what I'm doing is, say, playing volleyball," right? However, if there's something that's too much, too fast, too soon, an emergency situation that's overwhelming that you didn't foresee, something might happen where a part of this goes numb, like sensation might turn off, right? Or you might stop knowing where you are, like the meaning of where you're at. You might get disoriented, right? I don't know where I am anymore. I don't know, what is it that I'm doing? Where am I? Right? You might, your affect your feelings might get blunted, right, in a certain way. That can happen. So, or you might get fixated on certain images that you just get stuck on. All I can see over and over and over again is the coral reef or something like that, right? That image just keeps coming, and I don't even understand why or how that is. Okay, so the idea here is that when we experience trauma, we get thrown off of our surfboard like this, and we experience fragmentation, right? So some of these channels go numb or get stuck, right? Another way of saying that is some of the keys on our keyboard, and we're using the idea of a piano keyboard here, right? Some of the keys on our keyboard get stuck, right? We no longer are able to feel certain sensations, right? Or that goes numb. Or certain meanings just get lodged in my brain, like I'm not safe anymore in the world, or something could go wrong at any moment. And that meaning, that key on the keyboard, right? Key on the keyboard gets stuck, right? Or, all of a sudden I can't feel happy anymore. Or all of a sudden, I just start crying over and over and over again. I don't understand why, right? So keys can get stuck in the off position or the on position, right? Or I can get a certain image key can get stuck, right? Or I completely avoid seeing certain images too, right? So there's different ways that stuckness can happen. So the key on the keyboard can get stuck. And I think in terms of move better, feel better, right? The theme of this summit. I think when people experience trauma, there are places where their body does not want to move, right? Sometimes there are directions their head does not want to turn, right? Because that's linked with maybe a traumagenic circumstance, and their body is stuck because trauma happened there and it never felt safe enough to land back down, right? Okay, so let me just check in and see how that's landing. How's that landing? Yeah.
No, I think it's very helpful. It's I mean, I love the image of the surfboard. I think it's extremely, potent as I think back up through my own life. It's like, oh yeah, there's like being in the water on your own, trying to figure out, how to keep your head above water, right?
Yeah.
It's very helpful to give a frame for any of us that have struggled at different times. And then also then it's also very possible to get a surfboard back if you know how to get it back on it, right?
Absolutely.
So I like where it's going for that reason too. It doesn't feel like it's some hugely broken part of myself that somehow or another is going to take the rest of my life to fix. It's more like, oh, I need sort of the tools for how to get back on the surfboard.
Totally. Exactly. It's like, it's not a death sentence. It's not like a permanent thing. It's like you got thrown. Okay. And now we just have to make it safe enough for you to learn how to get back on the surfboard, to create enough resourcing or safety support.
And I also think, Albert, it's so important because for some people, the trauma is significant enough that we fear ever addressing it, because we're so scared to address it because we don't know that anyone has the skills to keep us from going under even further, right? And so I believe it can also provide some encouragement that there's a pathway here, that does not have to be re-traumatizing
Exactly.
or to make
Yeah.
it even worse.
Yeah, totally. That there is a way out, that there is hope, that with the right support that you can get back on the surfboard, bring the pieces together, and yeah, come back to wholeness and heal. Yeah. So.
So I wonder where this takes us then in this sort of traditional psychotherapy model. Um, a lot of us would say that, and maybe you wouldn't say this, so I'm going to say what I would say. In the
Yeah,
traditional
yeah, yeah.
psychotherapy model, sometimes it seems like so much emphasis is put on talking and thinking, like
Right.
trying to work with the rational thoughts around it. And which, of course, there's hardly any rational thoughts there because
Yeah,
you're
right.
overwhelmed, so they're not
Uh,
particularly rational. And I'm not, and so how is it that, in your view, thinking, can you think your way out of trauma? Is that something we can
yeah.
do?
Yeah, and that's actually I wrote a whole kind of small book or kind of fetch shrift on that. But yes, you're absolutely right. You can't just think your way out of trauma, right? That's one of the kind of misconceptions, or there's certain kind of models of psychotherapy which really center and prioritize just trying to think and create corrective beliefs. And I think there's really value in that, but it's not the whole picture. That's in some sense just one note on the keyboard, right? You do want, if somebody feels deeply unsafe and it's a trauma response, you want them to start to have a more accurate understanding of their current environment. It is good to have like a corrective belief and an accurate narrative, right? And you can't stop there, right? You need not just kind of that key on the keyboard, the corrective belief back in place. You need to have the feeling, just the feeling of feeling safe again in the world, the feeling of feeling like emotionally okay, the capacity to come into wholeness on different levels, not just the thinking level. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think this is probably so how do you do that? How do you actually do that? I think that might be a good place to continue on with this. So just like you said, Cynthia, right? The surfboard model and the keyboard model are actually hopeful, right? It doesn't mean you can't you're sentenced to a lifetime of stuckness, chronic pain, fragmentation, or trauma, right? With the right person. And this is how I like to diagram this on this. And this is, I guess, my own little spin. R stands for resources. That's the kind of semi-technical term for anything that helps you, the client, the person, whoever you are, feel a little bit safer in the world, a little bit more nurtured, a little bit more protected, right? So this could be in psychotherapy, a therapist. It could be a Feldenkrais practitioner if you feel safe with them. But somebody who is able to who's able to be with you and help you hold what you yourself cannot hold. And the idea here is that, okay, maybe this is your window of tolerance of what you can hold by yourself alone, but maybe with the support of somebody else who's spotting you, who's there with you, who's able to say, hey, I see you, I got you, it's going to be okay. And I'm right here, right? We can go slow, we can take this movement as in your own time or in your own space. We can listen to the experience that actually happens, so it goes slowly, so it's not too much, too fast, too soon, right? So it moves into a state of, we can take it easily, with comfort, right? So just slowing it down, and you can raise, you can offer a secondary function of co-regulation, where you help the person raise their window of tolerance, at least temporarily, so that they can get back on their surfboard so the wave doesn't feel like it's too much, right? And when you're in those circumstances of safety and you're in the fragmented state, if you just keep reaching back and saying, oh, but there's somebody here that's with me, and I can do this. I can feel this now. What the things that I couldn't feel that were too much before, I can actually now feel. And I can bring these parts back together. Like the body that went numb down here might actually start to shiver and shake and become unnumb. The feelings that were separated from images, those might start to link up again. Like I cry and I don't understand why, but all of a sudden I see, see my friend's face, right? Oh, that those fragments start to connect up again. The keys start to become strung together. Like I can actually play music again rather than just the frozen keyboard, right? So those are important ways in which, like with enough resourcing, with enough support, that a person can do what we call move from a fragmented state back into embodiment, right? Back into reconnection with the body, and integrate again and slowly allow those fragmented parts to come back down the arousal cycle back into the window of tolerance where you want them to land. Okay, so yeah. So let me just pause.
How do you feel then something like the Feldenkrais method? And it certainly doesn't have to be only Feldenkrais, but something like the Feldenkrais method can be integrated into someone's recovery from trauma.
Yeah, what a great question. So, one of the beautiful things about Feldenkrais is that, well, one, there's this ethos of awareness and attunement and going, like, you don't have to go fast, right? It's just like deep attention with somebody else's shared attention, helping to hold places. So at least the way I think of it is, if it's, say, for example, table work, right? Somebody else is helping to slowly be with you and bring their awareness with yours, right? Whenever there's two awarenesses together, like two awarenesses are better than one, right? There are places where I am, where my body doesn't want to go for whatever reason. And I don't even notice it. I don't even see where I gap out or try and skip over, right? And if there's somebody else like spotting me with me, they can first notice, oh, did you notice that there's this little part that's a little stuck? Oh, I didn't even notice that. Let's just spend a little time there. Okay. And then with that, the edges of what might have been skipped over or dissociated from, or maybe too difficult to integrate, that there's another person there, which makes that bearable, right? They've done these studies where they've put people in fMRIs, and taken, I guess the experiment was they're going to prick your foot, and they're not going to tell you when they're going to do it, but they're going to do it. And in the fMRI, which is basically a brain scan, the fear centers of the brain really light up. However, if you just have somebody who you feel connected to with you, holding your hand, and they do the same experiment, I'm going to prick your foot at some point. I'm not going to tell you when, but you have somebody holding your hand. It's like, oh, you can manage much more ably. Like your brain doesn't light up with fear or tightness. It doesn't become too much, too fast, too soon for you, right? Because you have another human awareness presence kind of with you, regulating you. So so those are, so that's some of the go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I think then another ethos area that maybe is interesting from the Feldenkrais perspective is that while the person may be coming to us from a feeling of brokenness or trauma, we don't see the person that way. And we're not in our minds, we're never working with trauma. We're working with a whole human being who's learning how to, know that they're whole, know that it all works, which I think is perhaps also something that could be valuable within
Totally.
that recovery framework.
Totally. Yeah. That instead of kind of a pathology mindset, right, where this is like, oh, we've got to get rid of these symptoms, right? Almost a listening mindset, right? That there's something right about your body and what it is, right? That there's some message that maybe those parts are trying to give. And if we just go slow, listen to them as we go, not try and erase them or avoid them or stamp them out, but just treat them with due kindness, care, and that can actually shift things. And maybe just real quick, and I know we're coming up a little bit towards the end, but just along those lines, just the last board, which I'll just mention really quick, if that's okay, is the boardroom, which is really about treating each of these parts up here, each of these fragments, as if it had its own voice and consciousness, right? So listening to each of these frozen keys on the keyboard as if it had its own voice that needed to be heard in the boardroom. That sometimes there are certain parts of our body that go numb, that go silent, that don't speak out, that don't speak forth. And that we need, in order to kind of come together as a whole body and being, listen to our full boardroom, right? Listen to the boardroom of our body, of the wisdom that's within. And so the idea here is just listening to each of these parts as if each of these fragments, as if it had its own individual dignity worthy of being listened to. Sometimes in the psychotherapy work, it's really, we've talked about sensation going numb, right? Or dullness that happens there. Sometimes it's like the inner child goes numb, right? Or the inner child goes away, or that part, dies down, the capacity for feeling happiness or joy, right? So, I think the boardroom framework is a useful way of conceptualizing things. Okay, so yeah, so those were, yeah.
So how does this outline that you've just given us, how does that relate to your full octave relational model of trauma healing?
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
you have time? I have time. If you have time, I've got time.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to share this. It's exciting to talk about. It's kind of my own expansion of the CYBAM model. So thanks for giving me a little space to talk about it. So just real quick, and the full octave model is basically an extension of the CYBAM model. So when I say CYBAM, right, I'm referring to the sensation, image, behavior, affect, meaning model that derived from, I guess, Peter Levine's work, although it's found in many other places. Peter Levine, Pat Ogden. But the CYBAM model is, in my opinion, sometimes not fully complete. And the full octave model, which I'll maybe just touch on briefly, since we have maybe just a little time, expands on this, what I'm going to call a pentatonic model of experience to a full octave model. So under the full octave model, it's a similar form, but there's just a few more vertices, right? And they spell out the nifty acronym TREATIES, TREATIES, TIES, because the way I remember it, we make treaties with trauma to try and get by. TREATIES. And because I think these things can fragment out, like sensation can fragment out. We can start to have repetitive or frozen behaviors, like meaning, affect, image. Those things can get fragmented out, but other things in addition to that can get fragmented out. So T stands for time. Okay. So we can get frozen in time. We can get stuck in a certain kind of temporal flashback. That note on our keyboard can get stuck, or we can have it play when we don't want it to, right? So a flashback would be a notion of like I'm existing as if it is just then, happening all the time, right? So that note is happening all the time. So that would be a key that's stuck in the on position, a temporal key that's stuck. Or there are memories that I just don't want to remember. Like, so it can either get stuck in the on position or the off position. Like, so the temporal keyboard can get stuck. R stands for relationship. So relationships, my capacity to relate to people when I experience trauma can get stuck in the off or on position as well. Like I can never want to see another human being in my life. I can go into agoraphobia or isolation. I can become very isolated, right? And my relational keyboard, my capacity for interrelating can be very diminished. I might not have all the keys on my relationship keyboard at my disposal. I might only be able to exist in isolation. Or conversely, I might become very clingy, right? The key on my relationship keyboard might get stuck in that position, right? So relationship is an important aspect. E stands for expression. There's some interesting studies in trauma. Bessel van der Kolk talks about this in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, on Broca's area, where during trauma, our capacity to vocalize or express actually shuts down. We lose our capacity to shout out or scream, right? There's just this nameless dread that arises, right? And so very frequently, people who have experienced trauma, that key gets turned off, their capacity to verbally express, right? And the rest of the keys are similar to SIBAM, but with different letters. So S is still sensation, right? So that's the same as the S down here. E is emotion, right? So that's the same as affect down here. I is image, right? So that's the same as the I down there. T is thoughts, right? That's the same as meaning down here. And A is action. And that's the same as behavior down there. So the full octave model is basically an extension of the SIBAM model, but with, I think, 3 critical elements that sometimes get left out of what can go numb or get stuck in trauma. So yeah, so those are, and I don't know, I think, Cynthia, when you first invited me to speak at the summit, I was excited just because, I think of when I learned Feldenkrais, just the whole notion of the pelvic clock, right? And how, as when I did my pelvic clock, it's like, wow, I'm really stuck over here, right? That peg on the clock is frozen, right? And this one, I'm just like, well, I really go fast through there, right? And I think the same thing happens like in metaphorically with the full octave, right? Sometimes like there's certain like, oop, I don't want to go to that time. Let's just skip over that, right? But I think there's a certain way, and I don't know if it happens in the counterclockwise clockwise. Like, I don't know if it's exactly the same, but there's an important kind of parallel, at least I thought, between being able to move smoothly through, for example, a pelvic clock, right? And being able to move smoothly through a full octave of what it means to be a human being experiencing sensation, emotion, thought, image, action, being able to express in connection with others across time. So that was at least one of the connections that I was excited.
Yeah.
And thanks for giving me the space to share that.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think also that, as a full pelvic clock, if you will, becomes available, then you realize it's many clocks happening throughout your entire body. It's not localized to the pelvic clock,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
there's connections all the way up and down.
totally.
So then, do you have a moment to tell us, like, what does a session look like in this model? Is it like
Yeah.
lots of different pieces then?
Yeah, good question. So, well, sessions, you always start with where the client is, right? Where are they? What's happening in them, for them? What's their, what are they aware of? What keys are present for them? And what are the edges of things that they sense are stuck, that aren't working, right? And then frequently it's those places that are just at the edge of, okay, I'm aware of this, and I am aware of this that's not working, or that is kind of stuck, and then we'll just start with that. And with that, there's so many ways in, right? There's all the different channels or notes on the keyboard. You can start with meaning, or you can start with sensation, you can start with image. Frequently, you listen, at least when I teach my students or when I work with clients, you listen for what channels flow, right? And you let those be present, and then you keep trying to expand their channels so that's more open, right? So for example, if somebody just has, like, whether it's chronic pain, okay, so notice that, and then is there an image that goes with that, right? Oh, it's like hot, right? And fiery. Oh, okay. And are there words that go with that, right? Oh, it's like I I, I need time, right? Or I need a break, or like slow down, or listen to me. Okay, so let's just notice that, right? And just be with that. And so in some ways, we're moving through the, not exactly the pelvic clock, but the octave clock, right? From noticing kind of this, is there a time that you feel is associated, or how old, right, does this feel, right? You know, um, and so you just kind of move through it slowly, and just try and fill it out a bit. And then frequently, yeah, you just add resourcing. So notice that, and see if there's movement that wants to happen, see if there's words that wants to happen. Sometimes there's feelings that arise. And then just creating the space which makes awareness possible. And with awareness, things start to naturally come together, right? That there's a natural impulse of the body to heal, of the person to want to come back into wholeness, right? If you just give them enough space and safety. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I think that's so important for people to hear, for any of us to hear throughout our lives, that it is our natural impulse to want to be better, to heal, to grow.
Yeah.
And we can rely on that to be present for us at a very deep level. It's just kind of giving it the right ingredients, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. Just giving it the right ingredients, right?
This has been very, very helpful. I feel like this will be a big encouragement to people. And I think you have a giveaway for folks that have been listening.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'll tell them how to get it if you'll just describe it.
Yeah, sure. So there's a little like ebook that I wrote up about that topic of why you can't think your way out of trauma. And it talks about this particular model understanding experience trauma and ways of healing. So yeah, I think it's like a valuable little piece. So if you want to know more about why you can't think your way out of trauma and why the body is so important in the trauma healing process, I'm happy to share that with all the people.
Good.
So
So you just look down below the video and click that little button, and you will get more connected to Dr. Wong and get his free ebook and follow up with him as you would like.
Wonderful.
It was
Thanks.
very, very, very helpful. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being with us, taking the time to be with us. And yeah, I think there's some good pieces in here for all of us to think about.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia. It's really an honor to be a part of your summit. And yeah, best of luck. I appreciate the work that you're doing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So, of course, you want to watch the other talks in this track, but also the panel discussion that'll be happening yet today. If you're watching it on the day that this is airing, then you'll get to watch also the panel discussion where I will be talking with a couple of other Feldenkrais practitioners about what we feel about what was shared today, and then also kind of whatever we think is most interesting or missing or where we would want to go with it ourselves. So do tune in for that as well. Thanks again, Albert.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye,
Thanks.
everybody.
Yeah.